Today we're diving into a topic that's about as fun as a root canal, but way more important, racism. Specifically, we're looking at countries where being black can feel like you're constantly swiping a declined credit card at the door. Now, before we get started, let me be clear. I'm not saying these countries are full of nothing but racist monsters. That's just not true. But what is true is that these places have some deep-rooted issues that make life harder for black people. And that's something we need to talk about. So buckle up, grab a snack, and let's get uncomfortable together. Because the first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that it exists, right? Alright, let's kick things off with the good old US of A. The land of opportunity, where dreams are supposed to come true and everyone is treated equally. Or at least, that's the idea. Now, America loves to talk about equality and justice for all, and hey, they've made some progress, I'll give them that. From the civil rights movement to more recent Black Lives Matter protests, there have been strides toward a more just society. But let's not act like they're handing out gold stars for effort. The reality is, black Americans still face a whole different set of challenges compared to their white counterparts. It's like running a race where the starting lines are miles apart. The reality is, black Americans still face a whole different set of challenges compared to their white counterparts. We're talking about everything from racial profiling by police to getting passed over for jobs and housing. These aren't just isolated incidents, they're part of a larger systemic issue that affects millions of lives. And don't even get me started on the mass incarceration rates. The prison system is overflowing and a disproportionate number of those behind bars are black. It's a crisis that has been ignored for far too long. It's like the system is designed to keep black people down, and then they turn around and blame them for not succeeding. The scales of justice are anything but balanced. It's wild, y'all. Look, I'm not saying every cop is bad or that every white person is racist. But the system? Yeah, the system has some serious problems. Look, I'm not saying every cop is bad or that every white person is racist. But the system? Yeah, the system has some serious problems. It's like trying to run a marathon with a 50-pound weight strapped to your back. And until those problems are addressed, black Americans will continue to face an uphill battle. And until those problems are addressed, black Americans will continue to face an uphill battle. Sure, some people might be able to do it, but it's a hell of a lot harder than it needs to be. It's like trying to run a marathon with a 50-pound weight strapped to your back. And the worst part is, this isn't even news to anyone. We've seen the videos, we've heard the stories, we know what's going on. It's like America is stuck in this endless loop of acknowledging the problem, promising to do better, and then going right back to business as usual. Sure, some people might be able to do it, but it's a hell of a lot harder than it needs to be. We've seen the videos, we've heard the stories, we know what's going on. It's like America is stuck in this endless loop of acknowledging the problem, promising to do better, and then going right back to business as usual. But for some reason, nothing seems to change. It's like America is stuck in this endless loop of acknowledging the problem, promising to do better, and then going right back to business as usual. It's like America is stuck in this endless loop of acknowledging the problem, promising to do better, and then going right back to business as usual. And that, my friends, is why we're still talking about this in 2023. It's time for America to stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. It's time for America to stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. Because until black lives truly matter, no lives truly matter. Okay, I'm getting fired up now. Let's move on to the next country before I start throwing things. Because until black lives truly matter, no lives truly matter. Okay, I'm getting fired up now. Let's move on to the next country before I start throwing things. Next up, we're heading down to Brazil, the land of carnival, beautiful beaches, and unfortunately some deeply ingrained racism. Now, Brazil has a huge black population. In fact, it's the country with the largest black population outside of Africa. But here's the thing, having a lot of black people doesn't automatically mean a country is free from racism. In Brazil, the legacy of slavery still casts a long shadow. We're talking about major disparities in wealth, education, and healthcare. Black Brazilians are more likely to live in poverty, less likely to have access to quality education, and more likely to be victims of violence. It's a system that's rigged against them from the start. And the police, let's just say they don't exactly have the best track record when it comes to treating black Brazilians fairly. There's a lot of talk about police brutality and racial profiling. It's almost like there's this unspoken rule that black people are somehow less deserving of respect and opportunity, and that's just messed up. Look, Brazil is an amazing country with a rich culture and beautiful people, But it's time for them to confront this dark side of their history and start building a more just and equitable society for all Brazilians. Because pretending the problem doesn't exist isn't going to make it go away. It's time for Brazil to step up and do better. Now let's talk about South Africa, a country that knows a thing or two about fighting against racism. They literally had a system of racial segregation called apartheid, which thankfully ended in 1994. But here's the thing about deep wounds. Even after they heal, they can leave behind some nasty scars. And that's what's happening in South Africa. The legacy of apartheid is still felt today, especially when it comes to economic inequality. Black South Africans are still more likely to live in poverty and have less access to education and job opportunities. It's like they're trying to run a race with a massive head start, and it's just not fair. And then there's the issue of crime. South Africa has a high crime rate, and unfortunately Black South Africans are often both the victims and the perpetrators. Now, I'm not trying to simplify a complex issue, but it's important to acknowledge that the cycle of poverty and violence is directly linked to the legacy of apartheid. When you deny a group of people basic human rights for decades, it's going to have long-lasting consequences. South Africa has made incredible progress since the end of apartheid, but there's still a long way to go. It's time to address the root causes of inequality and create a society where everyone has a fair shot at success. Because reconciliation without justice is just a fancy word for sweeping the problem under the rug. Next up, we're crossing the pond to France, the land of croissants, romance, and apparently, a whole lot of denial about racism. France, a country that prides itself on its revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, seems to have a blind spot when it comes to racial issues. Now, France likes to see itself as a colorblind society, where everyone is treated equally, regardless of race. The French Republic's official stance is that all citizens are simply French, without any hyphenations or distinctions. But as we all know, reality has a way of throwing shade on even the most idealistic views. The lived experiences of many people tell a different story, one where racial and ethnic minorities face significant challenges. The truth is, France has a serious problem with racism, especially when it comes to its Black and Arab citizens. These communities often find themselves at the receiving end of systemic discrimination and social exclusion. We're talking about racial profiling by police, discrimination in housing and employment, and a general sense that if your name is Mohammed, you're going to have a harder time getting ahead than if your name is Jean-Pierre. This isn't just anecdotal. Numerous studies have shown these disparities. And don't even get me started on the whole headscarf ban. This policy has been a point of contention for years, symbolizing the tension between secularism and religious freedom. It's like they're trying to erase the identities of Muslim women and force them to assimilate into a culture that doesn't seem to want them. The ban has led to widespread protests and has been criticized both domestically and internationally. Look, I'm all for freedom of expression, but there's a fine line between secularism and straight-up discrimination. The principle of laïcité, or secularism, is often used as a justification for policies that disproportionately affect minority communities. And France seems to be tap dancing all over that line. The country needs to reconcile its secular values with the reality of its diverse population. It's time for France to take a good, hard look in the mirror and acknowledge that it has a racism problem. This isn't about undermining French values, it's about living up to them. Because pretending it doesn't exist isn't going to make it go away. Ignoring the problem only allows it to fester and grow. It's time to have some real conversations about race and identity, and start building a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected. This means listening to the voices of those who have been marginalized and taking meaningful action. Because in the words of the great Nelson Mandela, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. It's a lesson that France, and indeed the world, needs to take to heart. Last but not least, let's pop over to the United Kingdom, home of the Queen, fish and chips, and a rich cultural heritage that spans centuries. However, it's also a place with a long and complicated history of racism, one that has left deep scars on its society. Now, the UK likes to pride itself on its multiculturalism, celebrating the diversity of its people, and the richness that different cultures bring. And don't get me wrong, they've come a long way in fostering a more inclusive environment. But let's not act like everything is rosy in the UK garden. There are still significant issues that need to be addressed. Black Britons still face significant challenges, especially when it comes to things like policing and the criminal justice system. The relationship between black communities and the police is fraught with tension, often exacerbated by incidents of racial profiling and discrimination. We've all seen the headlines about disproportionate stop and search rates, racial profiling, and the overrepresentation of black people in prisons. It's a troubling pattern that suggests an underlying assumption that black people are more likely to be criminals, which is just plain wrong. This assumption not only affects how black individuals are treated by law enforcement, but also how they are perceived by society at large. And then there's the issue of systemic racism, which is like the invisible force field that holds black people back, even when there's no overt discrimination. Systemic racism manifests in various ways, from education and employment to housing and healthcare. It's the subtle, often unconscious biases that create barriers to success and make black people feel like they don't belong. We're talking about things like unconscious bias in hiring practices, lack of diversity in leadership positions, and the subtle ways in which black people are made to feel like they don't belong. These issues are pervasive and require a concerted effort to address and dismantle. Look, I'm not saying the UK is a terrible place to be black. There are many black Britons who are thriving and making significant contributions to society. But I'm saying that there's still a lot of work to be done to create a truly equitable society where everyone has an equal chance to succeed. It's time to acknowledge the legacy of colonialism and its impact on race relations today. It's time to have honest conversations about race and privilege, and to start dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality. Because until black lives matter in the UK, they don't matter anywhere. The journey towards equality is ongoing, and it's one that requires all of us to be vigilant, proactive, and committed to change. Together, we can create a society where everyone, regardless of their race, has the opportunity to thrive and succeed. It's a collective effort that starts with awareness and leads to action. Let's continue to push for progress and ensure that the UK lives up to its ideals of fairness and justice for all. Because a truly multicultural society is one where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to reach their full potential. Until black lives matter in the UK, they don't matter anywhere. Let's make sure that change happens, and that it happens now. So, there you have it, folks. A quick trip around the world, highlighting some of the places where being black can feel like trying to hail a cab in a rainstorm with a $100 bill. It's not pretty, but hey, nobody ever said fighting for equality was going to be a walk in the park. The good news is we're having this conversation, people are waking up, speaking out, and demanding change, and that, my friends, is what gives me hope. So let's keep pushing, keep fighting, and keep believing that a better world is possible. Because as the great Maya Angelou once said, "Still I rise, and we will rise together." Peace out.